How long have you lived in Rowlett, and what's your favorite thing about this community?
Well, my wife and I have lived in Rowlett for over 40 years, raised two kids here. My favorite thing about the community has to be the people. In all that time growing from a small community to what I now think of as kind of a mid-sized city, the people have kind of stayed the same. They're friendly, they're like a small town. You can stop and talk to anybody, and they're all willing to help you. That's really my favorite thing.
How has your background, work experience, and/or volunteer service equipped you to serve on City Council?
Well, of course, I've been on council for almost a year now, and that has been an eye-opening experience, as everyone will tell you who first gets on council. Prior to that, I served on the Community Investment Advisory Board for a couple of years and ended up actually chairing that in 2020. I was also on the Charter Review Commission for the 2021 Charter update. And prior to that, I did 35 years at the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. Played a lot of different roles there, including doing economic research, doing budgeting, doing financial research, banking research, a lot of IT work, lending, ethics, just a whole lot of things, a very varied background. I used to joke that I put myself in my own internship program for my 35 years. So I think all of those things really help. And it's, looking back over the last 10 months, I think it's all been valuable for doing the job of a council member.
What are some objectives that you want to accomplish during your term in office?
Well, assuming I am lucky enough to get an next term in office, the number one on my list is to complete the membership process for becoming part of the North Texas Municipal Water District. We started that process last fall. It's taking quite some time. We kind of expected that, I think. I don't think we'll have an answer from the district before fall of this year. So that really was one of the driving factors for me coming back for re-election. Those who watched me last year know I said I'm in it for a year to get a few things done. Well, here I am again. Also on that list last year, and still not started yet, is getting the Miller Road Bridge started. I have some hope that we might be able to get some design money before the spring is over. I'd like to see that happen. I'd also like to get the dirt moving on the Merritt Road Interconnector extension. That project got some funding which required a environmental impact statement, and that process seems to take a long time. I'm going to see if there's something we can do reaching out to our federal help to see if we can accelerate that process, because everyone knows traffic going east and west of Rowlett is awful, and we need to work on all of those avenues to improve that situation. I also want to look at improving the project management practices in the city staff. I've noticed over the years that they seem to have some challenges getting some projects started. I've not been real happy with the project status reporting that comes out. I actually was asked to go to a meeting of the Rockwall Transportation Coalition last night, and I thought their status report for all of their transportation projects was a model we should really follow. Stepping in for the very first time, I was able to see exactly what was going on, how much it was costing, what the status was in a 30-minute meeting. That was pretty incredible. I also want to investigate ways we might be able to improve the cost accounting system for the city. And I don't want to say that there's something wrong with what we're doing, because, and I want to make sure I congratulate the city on this, they got an unmodified opinion on the audit again, which is almost unheard of the number of years. And for those of you who aren't in the audit business, that means we are clean as a whistle in the city in terms of our accounting and our reporting. The challenge I see in the cost accounting area is it's difficult to get an answer to a question like, well, how much it costs to maintain Community Park? They'd have to do substantial research to find that. I want to see if there's a way that we can build a cost accounting system in that would allow them to quickly produce that information, because I think it's very valuable to decision making, especially around the budget process. Those are probably top of my list. It's a 3-year term, so I'm sure I'll be adding things as I think of them.
What programs would you propose to help deter criminal activity in Rowlett?
Deterring criminal activity in a mid-sized city is a real challenge. I've got a couple of specific things. There are these devices called flock cameras. We were able to buy, I think, a dozen of them last year. And just last week, we talked about being able to acquire some more. They are license plate recognition and auto recognition cameras. They kind of help you after the fact, but I think it would also serve as a deterrent if it's well known that we have those, so that the bad guys don't want to do the bad deeds in our city. Similarly, last week we approved some funding to add some cameras in some of our parks where we've had some challenges. I think those things serve as a deterrent. I really don't think that a lot of times they don't work well after the fact because people disguise themselves, but if people know they're on camera, they tend to, let me rephrase it, they tend to avoid areas when they know they're on camera, so that's a good thing. The other thing I want to do, I want to update section 42.94 of our municipal code that governs the park hours. We have two types of parks in the city. We have destination parks and we have neighborhood parks. It's pretty common, I think, throughout the country for neighborhood parks to be open dawn till dusk. Right now, our statute says that our parks are open till 11 p.m. I know there are people who have concerns about being able to walk their dog and things like that. I think we can address that in an update that does say that our parks are closed. What that does is it gives our police officers a reason to approach when you have groups gathered in a park after dark that they would not have otherwise if the park is open till 11 p.m. In addition to that, I would to continue to increase police staffing. We're very happy we were able to do that last year. Well, it was one of the eye-opening things last year that we really have too few staff covering too big an area. We've made some improvement, and the new chief is doing very well at recruiting and getting people trained and out on the street, but I think we probably need some more on the street. The other thing, and the chief is really into this, and that is to encourage and support neighborhood watch programs. Went to a neighborhood watch meeting for a neighborhood, I guess last week or the week before, I forget. Very engaged people. Chief was very engaged in that. Community policing really is how you prevent crime in your community. So we need to encourage that. Chief was very forthright in asking people to call. Don't worry about whether you're consuming resources. If you see something which is concerning you, call. So those are some of the measures, and there may be other things that we can do in the upcoming year or two to figure that out.
What key areas of infrastructure in Rowlett do you believe need immediate attention, and how would you propose those be addressed?
Okay, I'm going to get tired of this broken record. Miller Road, Miller Road, Miller Road. We have a project underway already to take care of Miller from Dow Rock over to the railroad tracks. We have a good Miller Road all the way up to President George Bush Freeway, and we have this gap in the middle. You can't walk across the road through there. You can't bicycle across the road through there. You can't hardly drive your car through there. So Miller Road is really the key to me. I was thinking about this last night. We have 4 lanes eastbound and 4 lanes westbound in the city of Rowlett, if you don't count people snaking through up in Princeton and Dow Rock. That's really unacceptable in a city that has almost 70,000 people in it. So we really need to get focused in on how to do that. We're fortunate that because of the pandemic funding, DART is allocating some money to the city of Rowlett, and it is my hope that I can convince the rest of the council this spring to reallocate some money from the Industrial Street project over to start the design of Miller Road. The Industrial Street project, we believe, can be paid with the funds DART is bringing to us. Sticking with the roads theme, the Merritt Road interconnector, that would add additional lane capacity for people to get into the northern end of town or to go through the northern end of town. Again, for that, we're held up now. We've got almost all of the funding, but we're held up now by this environmental impact study, which, the rule of thumb is 5 years. Well, we can't wait 5 years. So I intend to reach out to our congressional delegation to see if they can do whatever's necessary to get the EPA moving on this thing. It's really kind of dire, I think. the other thing here is parks maintenance. I keep hearing, I'm the liaison to the Parks Board right now, and I keep hearing about, problems with irrigation in the parks, and just kind of general maintenance things. We need to invest in our existing park infrastructure to make sure it is an asset to the city, so it draws people to the city who want, people want, schools, roads, parks. That's pretty much why people move in. So, maybe, yes, I put them behind the roads, but we've got to maintain our parks. I've been talking with the gentleman who runs the Softball Association and Community Park, and we need some improvements there. Like I said, we need the irrigation fixed. I know there was a request for an irrigation technician in the last budget we weren't able to fulfill, but we need to invest in our parks. And that includes the Waterview Golf Course. I know we had a spirited debate in the meeting last week about Waterview. I know there's a lot of concern about, are we subsidizing golfers? We're not. Golfers are paying their way. The Waterview Golf Course is a big asset to this community. In this year, we are going to have 3 amateur PGA events or USGA events, I forget which, playing there. That creates a reputation of Rowlett being a place to be. That's the kind of thing that opens the eyes of businesses. Say, oh, well, we're going to have amateur tournaments in there. We're going to maybe we need to open up a hotel nearby that golf course. And of course, we all know that the Sapphire Bay is coming, and the plan there is to have a resort-style hotel. And resort-style hotels, they host a lot of golfers, so there's an opportunity for us to really put Rowlett on the map with that. It's a challenge to get the money to invest in the course and the tight budgets that we have, but we've got to keep chipping away at that and find a way to get some of the big boulders done too. Last but not least, I think our water and sewer infrastructure is in pretty good shape, but one thing that happens to cities that evolve over time and develop in fits and spurts, as we did here over the last 40 years, is you get dead-end water lines. And we apparently have a lot of those, to the extent that the cycle to clean our water system lasts longer than it needs to if we had a completely circular or a looped system to where the water could flow all the way through. You have to really push water into a dead-end pipe to get it to clean that pipe. So we need to keep investing in that. There's ongoing maintenance in all of the water and sewer stuff. They do, I think, a really good job in keeping up with that. There's new pumps going in that pump the water into the main water towers. We just talked about last week putting generators on the sewer lift stations so that we don't have a problem if there's power outages. There's not, I think, an immediate need in that area other than to maintain the budget we need to keep those projects going. Unlike our roads where we really need to play catch up.
If given the opportunity, what changes would you recommend be made to Rowlett's comprehensive plan?
So this question made me go back and look at it again. That's a long document. A lot of valuable information. It was last updated in 2019, and looking back through it, if you think about it, the 2019 in the city's a long time ago. A lot has happened in that time. It does need to be updated. I think the goals that are listed are still applicable, but I'd like to see the focus change a bit. At the time, the plan identified what are known as opportunity zones. We need to revisit those because they exclude some major ones and some are done. So, for instance, Signature Gateway was an opportunity zone. Well, it's all but done. There's one small tract of land left once the Cambridge Homes development goes in that I suspect will be single-family homes. So it's done. It needs to be no longer focus. Sapphire Bay is not mentioned, nor was Bayside in that document. And that's something that, while it's, I'll say, somewhat out of our hands, still needs to be a focus in terms of making sure that project goes through to fruition. Downtown is not mentioned. And I think our populace would really like to see a downtown that they could go and visit and walk around in the evening and shop and dine. So I think it needs to be included and focused in on when we do the update on the comprehensive plan. I'd also like to see, in terms of the land use, a greater emphasis on what I will call high quality developments that drive the city's median income up. We keep talking about that we want businesses here, we want good restaurants. Well, those business establishments look to the disposable income. And there's a whole market process that goes in when someone is trying to sell a piece of property. They look at the radius around that property, they look at the disposable income of the people in that area. So it's very important that we drive those businesses. I'm very happy to see a development going along, a housing development going in on the Dalrock Road side by Dalrock and Schrader, Grand Homes, and I forget who the other one is. The price point on those homes is such that we will be bringing in people with the kind of disposable income that will support the restaurants that we really want to see in Rowlett. Happy to see that. I also want to see greater focus on downtown as an entertainment venue. There really isn't much entertainment down there now. The only live entertainment we ever see is when the city is putting something on. I have a great deal of hope with the Cotton Gin development that's in progress out there, that we'll see something coming out of that. But there are some things to do in downtown that people go where there's entertainment. It's been true now in the development world. When I was growing up in the 70s, you built shopping malls because people went to a shopping mall as part of their entertainment. And that was the anchor. The department stores were the anchors to draw people in. It's different now. You have to have that entertainment. Entertainment could be a movie theater, could be a live show. Most often these days it's a live show. And then that draws in the ancillary businesses that benefit from the crowd that those things draw in. And we see it today with the summer concert series, with the lunch on the lawn things, that draws people in, and then the businesses in downtown benefit from that. So I want to see that as a focus in our comprehensive plan.
What items of consideration would you give to a zoning case that comes before the council?
So this is something I've learned a lot about in the past 10 months or so. State law is pretty specific about what a city needs to consider when it's considering a zoning regulation. And I'm gonna read this because it's very specific. This is in Local Government Code, section 211.004. The regulation, quote, must be designed to 1, lessen congestion in the streets, 2, secure safety from fire, panic, and other dangers, 3, promote health and general welfare, 4, provide adequate light and air, 5, prevent the overcrowding of land, 6, avoid undue concentration of population, 7, facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewers, schools, parks, and other public requirements. That's pretty specific, and that's straight from state statute saying this is what you as a city must consider when you're considering a zoning change. And I think the staff does a pretty good job when they do their analysis of looking at those things. Now, I think of them more generally as kind of the big three: public health, public safety, public welfare. Those are really, I think, encapsulate all of this. Public health doesn't often come into play in a zoning change. It can. When it does, it probably trumps other things. I think of the problem Frisco has with the battery recycling plant up there. You can still drive by today on the Dallas North Tollway and see that there's acres of empty land which will probably never get developed because of the way the lead from the battery recycling has poisoned the land in that area. So that kind of thing can trump any other consideration. As to public safety, public welfare, they come into play most often in the zoning changes. So the things we need to do, we need to consider the impact of the development on the demands placed on police and fire. I think sometimes we haven't done that sufficiently. I don't think we realize the repercussions of adding 5,000 or 6,000 apartments to the city, what that meant in terms of the policing and the fire that we would need. So when you look at the development, you have to ask yourself, is it going to require more staff? Do we need more firemen? Do we need more policemen? Do we need more facilities for them, as we're seeing with Sapphire Bay? Do we have the infrastructure to support it? Are the roads sufficient? And I think, the general response from a citizen in Rowlett being, no, the roads are not sufficient. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that, congestion is everywhere. Ours is maybe sometimes worse than others, but it is certainly an important consideration. Will it make traffic worse, much worse, much, much worse? That's kind of maybe the way to put it. Water and sewer, of course, we've got to consider, and staff does a real good job in making sure that we're on board with that. If there are improvements needed, will the economic impact of the development pay for the improvements, or are we hanging the cost of that on the taxpayer? And a lot of that is back and forth sometimes. We have developers come in and they're willing to do some road improvements and some things like that. Those are considerations. Maybe we have a road that we really wanted to repair, we haven't been able to, and developers willing to do that for us if we approve their zoning. So those things come into play. A very important thing is, how will the change affect the quality of life of the nearby residents or nearby businesses? This is, I guess a lot of people call this the not in my backyard syndrome. When those come up, I've made it my practice to look to the future land use plan as part of our comprehensive plan, the FLUP. It lays out what the city's expectations were in terms of how land in the city will develop over time. It's not the zoning map, it's a future land use plan, and there are differences between those two. So the question is the zoning change being requested significantly different from what's in that plan? If it is, does it add better benefit than what we had in the plan, or is it a detriment to what we had planned to do? The people around the property being zoned moved in or started their business in that area based upon their knowledge about what was being planned. And then we have someone come in saying, well, we're going to change that plan. We need to ask the question, is it going to make it better for those residents and those businesses, or is it going to make it worse? Now, if it makes it worse, then have to ask the second question, does it make everyone in the city better off or not? And does it do so materially? So you can find cases where, you're going to make the neighbors mad because they don't want it in their backyard, but you're going to benefit the entire city in what's being developed. I've seen that happen over and over again in my 40 years here. I've not been in a position of having to make those decisions until this past year. So that kind of crystallized my thought around how to approach it. And that's really my thought around zoning. I guess the final thing is, what is the long-range impact on the city's budget? We're behind the curve on our infrastructure a little bit in roadways, I think. We're trying to play catch up. We really don't want to add things that put us further behind if we can help it.
What types of economic development incentives do you believe are right for Rowlett?
Well, first I want to start by saying I wish we had more tools. We are limited by virtue of our membership in DART. 1% of our sales tax goes to DART. Cities of Saxe and Rockwall and Mesquite are not in that same boat, so they have some additional tools. They can set up economic development corporations that receive some of those funds and then can do things like make grants to businesses to come in. They actually make direct loans. They can even do direct investment, I believe. Those are things that we as a city really can't do because we are the city doing those things as opposed to a development corporation. On top of the fact that we just don't have that level of funding. That 1% sales tax from DART this past year meant we gave them over $8 million in tax dollars that we might otherwise have used elsewhere. So the tools we have available are to waive either taxes or fees. Taxes in terms of property taxes or sales tax rebates, fees in terms of development fees like road impact fees, water sewer impact fees, those types of things. We've used those in the past. Those are authorized under what are known as 380 agreements from the state. They can be successful. We have also used what's known as a tax increment reinvestment zone. We've used that in a couple of places around the city. What that does is allows us to reimburse a developer for infrastructure costs that they incur. So I use the Lakeview Business District as a case. So they are going to come in, they're going to build water and sewer and roads in the area where they're planning to build their business. And we will reimburse them out of the increase in taxes from the increased appraised values of the properties in that area. Now, they aren't getting it all, they're only getting 50%. It's a very complicated formula. There's a 50% of some part, 40% of another part. Don't need to go into that deeply here, but it's a way to draw economic development when you don't have cash to be able to give out. You're basically giving cash out over time to pay for the infrastructure that the development needs to be able to exist. And that seems to work pretty well. I don't believe we need to incentivize residential development unless it is in the form of a mixed-use kind of development. Certainly, I would not support any kind of economic incentive for standalone multifamily developments. Those seem to be popping up anywhere. It's like mushrooms. But mixed-use developments, that kind of fits in with part of my vision, which I'll talk about later. The idea that there are areas where, when you get home from work, you park your car, you want to be able to go and walk around. You got a nice neighborhood, you have an easy walk into an area to get a coffee or whatever you want to do. That's an attractive lifestyle for many, many people, and I think we have an opportunity in the city for that. So I would be up for incentivizing that kind of a development. Of course, any incentive needs to look at the long-term budget impact. If you aren't getting a positive benefit out of providing the incentive in terms of the city's budget, then you just shouldn't do it. It's hard to estimate those things. I know the Economic Development Department does a good job plugging things into the software that they use to make estimates. Maybe I need to add this to my goals. I want to understand that software a little better. If we're using it, the developers are looking at it and know how to plug into it to make the benefits come out to where it encourages the incentive. So I want to make sure that we on council understand the numbers that are coming back to us out of those programs. I think that's pretty important thing. So again, it's got to be a positive impact. What is long term? It ought to be a positive within at least 5 years. And then make up for anything that we had to give away over the longer term, the next, between 5 and 20 years. Otherwise, we're going to be further and further behind in that infrastructure. So, can't afford that.
What types of development do you foresee for Rowlett's remaining land?
Let's see. Land use, future land use of what we have left. Well, there's not a lot left. Sapphire Bay is already under a development agreement, and it's pretty well spelled out what's supposed to be in that area. We've got residential and hotels, restaurants, water features. We need to stay on that, but it's not something that we have to make decisions about in the future in terms of what goes there. Still the big area for us is the North Shore area. There's quite a bit of empty land up there. And I would say at this point in the Metroplex, kind of underutilized land. And it's not just the area you can see right from George Bush out there, as I think of it, the little golden triangle out there where Merritt and Bush kind of meet. There's also some property to the east of Liberty Grove. I want to say it's about 50 acres over there that looks prime for development. So what I see in that area, and I think about this every time. In fact, I brought a picture. I don't know if this will show up. This is the area right along George Bush, and you've probably noticed that there's a dam right there. Right behind that dam is this little lake. And every time I think about that, I think about a development up in Frisco, right at 121 on the tollway called Granite Park. They had to build their lake. We don't have to build our lake. We can, I'll say, revitalize this lake, and we can put walkways around the outside of this lake that are bordered by businesses, restaurants, whatever, what have you. This would be one of the areas where I would break my golden rule about multifamily and say, well, this is probably a place where you could put in some condos and develop this area as an kind of a pocket of urban lifestyle. So yeah, you got the bush here, you go off to your job, up into, wherever you are, McKinney, Plano, wherever, you come back, you've got this nice environment, again, where you can get home, park the car, walk the dog, stop at the cafe, have a bite to eat, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of what I see as one of the big visions. I still have it in my mind to try to get us a Costco up there somewhere. I like Costco, and on top of that, they generate a huge amount of tax revenue. We are just about equidistant in their locations between the one up on 75 in Plano and the one out in Rockwall. So I think there's a good market for it. I've actually reached out through LinkedIn to Costco, but I haven't got a response from them. Something I want to follow up on and try and get a little more push in that area. Okay, I'm a golfer, I admit it. I like Topgolf. It's a great entertainment venue. Anywhere you see a Topgolf, you see other things popping up. I think there's a tract of land in the North Shore area that would just be perfect. I think the people who are playing the game would be able to hit their balls and be looking out at the northern end of the lake up there. A couple of pieces of property that I think that the folks who have them are willing to part with them for the right price. Other areas besides the North Shore, we have a golden opportunity along the President George Bush Turnpike just south of 66. There's a bunch of apartments going in right now on the west side there. There's a good commercial strip there. Just to south of that, at the George Bush and Miller, there's a tract of land which is zoned commercial. I'd love to find out if we can attract an HEB into there. I don't know if we can or not. I'm not sure what their price point is in terms of median income and that kind of thing. That's something we need to find out. I know there was discussion years ago about getting a Kroger into the city, and Kroger was asking for cash. Well, not something we have, so we'd have to be able to find some kind of incentive to get them in. The other area I mentioned a little while ago, in addition kind of to the infill that we have around the city, which we're seeing is actually happening, I'd say organically. We've got a lot of new little retail centers going in, and they are being filled up. Our vacancy, last I heard from the economic development folks, was reasonable in terms of where we are. Of course, all that space operates based upon its classification. There's A space, B space, and C space. So if anything's empty, your C space is empty, except for people who can't afford to pay rent. Your A space goes pretty quick for the most part. And over time, your A space becomes B space, becomes C space, and then you revitalize it, becomes A space again. So it's kind of a cycle for how the retail goes through. So that's filling in pretty well. I do want to find a way for us to incentivize development in the downtown area. I think that's vital to quality of life in the city. So, that'd be an area of focus for me. Looking at what we can do there. We've had some conversation already about the consultant brought their plan forward, making some recommendations. There are some other things that they said that we can do that I think we can tackle quickly and start to draw people in.
Rowlett has significant facilities needs across many of its departments. How do you prioritize the facilities needs that exist, and why?
The facilities issue is a real challenge for us because it's a big nut to crack. It's a lot of money. I like what happened last year with the Community Investment Program Task Force, where they went out and they did surveys and asked the residents, what do we need? What are your priorities? And I'm pretty much on board with where their priorities came out. I did the facility tour and was amazed at the decrepit condition of some of our city facilities. We authorized some, I'll say, emergency repairs just recently to fix some of the more egregious ones. But we need a new police, municipal court, and fire admin building. We have outgrown, it's not outgrowing anymore, we have outgrown where the police are working in the courts. I was very surprised to find that we actually have a courtroom, and maybe I even shouldn't say this publicly, but we have a courtroom with windows facing a roadway. I can tell you that a courtroom would not be designed that way today. You don't do that. The fire admin building, I invite everyone to go walk around the outside of that thing and, just don't breathe too hard or might fall over. It needs to be, that's a facility that is going to be a vacant lot once we move out. I think maybe the police building, we'd be able to turn to some other uses, but that fire admin building needs to go. And along the same line, the animal shelter is overwhelmed. I have concern there because what I keep hearing is no matter how big you build it, and what we're proposing to build isn't even going to accommodate the animals we already have out being fostered. We've got to do something, and I've asked that question. So the immediate need is we need more space, we need better space. But what do we do to stem the flow? I mean, what I don't want to do is build the magnet such that, okay, if we build for 80, all of a sudden we have 800. So we've got to do something beyond simply building the shelter. We've got to find a way to prevent the inflow. I don't know what that is. I'm not an expert in that area. Other city facilities, city administrative staff in the old city admin building is, as Brian likes to say, using bunk desks. The parks maintenance staff, they are working out of shipping containers. We've brought shipping containers out to Community Park, and they're literally officing out of shipping containers. We just have so many needs. I voted to put the funding for the public safety building and the animal shelter on the May ballot. I will say I have some reservations in the sense that I don't feel like we have a plan now for addressing the entire scope of what's needed. We're kind of jumping out and saying, hey, we got to get going. So we put this on the ballot and we're asking the citizens to approve a tax increase to do this. But I'd like to see council focus in more deliberately, and maybe this needs to be like an all-day work session to figure out, okay, what's going to go where? We don't have that kind of domino effect of how things are going to happen. So what do we do with the old police station when we build a new one? What are we going to do with it? We should have a plan for that when we go to plan the new facility. I think for quite some time, council, prior to this last council, was focused in on kind of building the big city admin center with everybody going to one place, and that was the estimate back a couple of years ago was $160 million. Well, put that in perspective, our budget's $122 million, so that's a really big nut to crack. So I think this council was wise to say, well, we can't do all that at once. We need to break it down and find a plan to do the pieces as we can, address the most dire needs first. I still have concern about making use of the city-owned land on George Bush, and I'll express that publicly. I was looking at it again today. We've got 70 acres of land over there. On one side is the George Bush Turnpike, and the other side is the lake. It strikes me as being extremely valuable property. I know it's very convenient. The police station there, they can get in and out quickly based on the service roads. But there are other locations we could do that into where that land may not be quite as valuable. So it's still, assuming the bond passes and I'm elected again, I'm still going to be the fly in the ointment here and say we need to find a way to make a more cost-effective solution for all of our city facilities. I have talked about, but I don't have enough knowledge to really pursue the idea of a build and lease back, which is pretty common, where you get a developer who actually builds the facility, and then you basically fund the building, and then you sell it to them, and then you lease it back for 50 years or 90 years. It's often done as a way to manage those costs over time. I did not see in the study of facility needs any discussion of key adjacencies. That's the discussion about who needs to be next to who. We talked about it. Police and courts Yeah, okay, jail and courts is really what we're talking about. The jail and the courts need to be next to each other. Helpful then if the police are near the jail, because then there's a little, some convenience factor and probably safety factor in that, and they all have to be secured. Um, Fire admin, they don't have to necessarily be near courts, but the fire admin building's falling down, so we need to do something with that. I did not really see a lot of that discussion, and as you can tell, I've been through one of these processes before in my prior employment. We moved from one side of Dallas to the other side of Dallas. I was involved from a departmental perspective. One thing that I observed in that process that I think we need as a city, if we're going to embark on this process, we need to hire someone who's going to manage that process, who's an expert in that process. And I'm not talking about a consultant, because a consultant is about, what is it, the old saying, the chicken and the pig and breakfast. So, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed. We need someone who's committed on this, that their employment is based upon them getting it right. I think that would be a key in making sure that this major project, is successful and does what we need it to do. Okay, so one last item on this topic. We have a tendency to, anytime we have to make a difficult decision, we get a consultant. And we've done that here. They've done the space estimation, that kind of thing. But a consultant doesn't build your building for you. So in this particular case, I think we would really benefit from talking to developers who develop the buildings. They have staff that can do the design. They have staff that can tell you your space needs. And let me tell you, Dallas has lots and lots of really good developers. So I'd like us to get engaged with the developers rather than the consultants whose job really ends once they give you their report. I want a job to end when they give us the keys to the building.
Are there any departments, programs, or functions that the city does not currently have, which you feel would add a level of service and improve quality of life for residents?
So I can't really think of any departments. We're kind of a, if you will, kind of a standard home rule city in terms of the things that we have, the functions that we have. My focus is, and I mentioned this earlier, I think we need to have a laser focus on improving the project management capability of the city. Whether that is, setting up a project management office, doing project management training, both. I don't know that I necessarily want to go down the path of a consultant, because whenever you hire a consultant, you end up paying a lot of overhead. So I'd rather see if we can tackle this project management issue ourselves. Too many of our projects have been slow starting, and some have been sidelined. So I think about the Miller Road project, Dow Rock over to the railroad tracks. That was 2018 bond money. Now I know lately we've run into some construction issues that are delaying it some more, but we didn't start on those construction issues until, 4 years after the bond money was passed? That's too long a time. We need to have a better plan in place when those projects get approved. Same thing with Chiesa, or as Google likes to say, Chiesa Road, running from Miller down to Dow Rock. We kind of got started, but I don't know that I've seen a project plan that identifies what are the critical path elements. What do we have to get done in what order in order for that project to be delivered? And that's the kind of thing that I expect to see from an organization that is now we've gone from being the small kind of mom and pop kind of city to we're a mid-sized city now. We need to have modern processes and project management in place to deal with this in a professional manner. It maybe exists and I'm not seeing it in the city. Council doesn't see everything. But it does exist. I really want to see it. When we talk about a project, I want to see a project plan. I want to know where we are in the project plan, when the delivery is, what the cost is. If there's cost overrun, they happen, but we need to be able to identify when those occur. I'm really, frankly, tired of hearing, we passed this in 2018, but now it's going to cost us 25% more because we didn't start it. And we keep hearing that. The bathroom at Lakeside Park South, that was on a 2015 bond money. We may finally get it this spring, so it takes us 8 years to build the bathroom. I think we need to focus in a little more on our process in the city. So process improvement, project management, and those are things that I'm going to be focused in. As the audience probably knows, the council is actively engaged in hiring the next city manager. Brian Funderburk is retiring in July. And one of my key elements when I'm looking at these people is going to be whether they are experts in process. Because I think we've reached a stage we've got to have that.
Are there any departments, programs, or functions that the city currently has, which you view as unnecessary or extraneous?
So, in terms of unnecessary, extraneous departments or programs, I have a hard time thinking of any. I think the city has tried to run a lean operation, and I think they've done a pretty good job. Maybe I can say this because I was told I was doing this. I was maybe being a little over lean and not asking for resources when I felt I needed them. There's a level of service that people expect, and if you don't have the resources to meet it, then things get delayed, and you don't meet that service level. But I don't know if that's really been going on with the city. Again, council is arm's length from operations, and that's that's a good setup, and it's by law that it's set up that way. We can ask questions, but we cannot direct. So we ask a lot of questions. The only thing I can see in terms of maybe an opportunity for improvement is that we have, I say, similar operations. We have the parks maintenance crews and we have the public works maintenance crews. They're all working with equipment of various types. And to me, one gas engine's like another, diesel engine, whatever they are. They all pretty much work the same way. There's mechanics, there's electrical, there's all this kind of stuff. So we have the parks people working on their stuff up in the parks maintenance facility in Community Park. We have the public works people working on theirs down at the public works facility. So when we start talking about adjacencies and where we locate our city staff, I think that's one we need to consider. We need to think about, well, should we have one garage, one repair facility that manages all of the equipment, no matter who's the official owner within the city? I think that would be a good synergy. So.
Taking into account the cost of any proposals you've already mentioned, what ideas do you have to help lessen the tax burden on residents and commercial entities in the city?
Oh, yes, tough questions. I know a lot of our residents were shocked by last year's residential appraisals. The council was able to lower the tax rate. Some people are still paying more than they were before the appraisal. That's just kind of how that process works. They don't reappraise everybody every year. And we're all facing the same inflationary environment that is pervasive, I guess, throughout the world at this point. So when we went through the budget process, we had to recognize that some resources were needed that we didn't need in prior years. In terms of how do we lessen the impact? Because I think when I look at the needs of the city in terms of being able to provide the service people expect, I don't see the budget going down. I don't even see the capability to keep the budget flat. I know we've got some budgetary challenges coming in the next 2 or 3 years. The council's been working with city manager on reserving funding to fill a funding gap. We've gone through multiple times gone through the process of applying for and receiving grants to add police staff and fire staff. Well, that's really good, except eventually those grants run out and you have people working for your city that need to be paid and have their equipment, their cars, or whatever the case may be. So I do not see our budget going down. We have this gap we're filling with funding as we can find it. So I don't think it's good news in terms of the tax burden. I won't say the tax rate, but the tax burden. Your tax dollars are not likely, your tax bill is not likely to go down. There is one thing I've thought about that we can do to lessen the impact when you have these sudden increases in appraisals, and that is to alter the homestead exemption. Right now, the city offers a $5,000 homestead exemption. It's a flat fee. It's been that way for as long as I've been in the city of Rowlett, which is 4 years now. I have noticed other cities have moved to a percentage-based homestead exemption. That gives you some protection when your appraised value goes up. So if you go up 20,000, if it's a 10% homestead exemption, you immediately carve off an additional 2,000 from money you're being taxed. I think the cities I've seen doing it were going through kind of a ratcheting process where they went to a lesser percentage. I don't know if it was a 5 or a 10%, and then we're ratcheting up to a 20%. What that does, in addition to offsetting some of the increase in appraised values, is it shifts the burden away from your residential taxpayer to, I'll call a general term, a commercial taxpayer. A commercial taxpayer includes investment property owners. People may recognize that we've had a lot of property in the city and then around the country, for that matter, being purchased by large investment firms and then turned into rental property. Adjusting the tax burden between investment properties and residents, I think, is one way to help discourage that a little bit in the city. So if an investor is not going to get your 20% homestead exemption, so they're going to have to cover that additional tax burden. It's not a huge tax burden, but still have to cover that additional tax burden in the rent they're charging, which makes the rent a little higher, which may make it less attractive as an investment vehicle. The downside to this is, of course, it hits all commercial equally, and I don't want to disadvantage our small business. I know, Walmart, Target, those guys, they can afford that kind of thing. CVS, but the mom and pop cake, cupcake company, the little ice cream shop or the smoothie shop, whatever, they may not own their property, but they're paying rent, and if we increase the tax cost of the property they're leasing, eventually their rents will go up. So I'm racking my brain trying to find a way that we can lessen the impact for those types of businesses. I was just talking yesterday to one businessman in town about that. He said, well, the best way is just to, see that those houses across the way, those are, build more of those, because then they carry the tax burden. And I'm mindful of that. Part of my goal is so that we do build things, businesses and homes, that have a positive impact on the budget, because that then allows us as council to not increase the tax rate or the taxes for those who already are here. If we build things that have a negative impact on the budget, your taxes are going up, or your services are going down. There's, it's simple math, simple arithmetic. It works that way. So the best way for us to improve our tax position, other than these kind of tweaks around the edge, is to shift the burden to the new development that pays more in taxes than they're consuming in city services. That's really fundamentally how you have to do it.
Please share your financial background and elaborate on your qualifications to oversee the city's $100 million plus annual budget.
Overseeing the budget. Oh, talk about drinking from the fire hose. So I have been through one city budget process. I brought my copy. Actually, it has my picture in it. First time I've had my picture on a budget. I'll say it was an enlightening process. I've done a lot of budgeting in my career. I did a lot of different things. One of my early ventures was to actually produce the revenue and cost estimates for the check processing business for the Federal Reserve Bank, and make recommendations for the pricing of the various products. That was probably about 1985 or 6 when people wrote checks. Your younger viewers are wondering, what's a check? Anyway, at that time, that was about a $35 million budget, which I don't know what that translates into in 2023 dollars. Probably something similar to the city size, I would guess. Did a lot of departmental budgeting, that kind of thing. A lot of project budgeting over the years. Capital budgeting under FASB rules. One of my eye-opening events is that we operate under GASB, which still boggles my mind, and how that works. And I have to think even in terms of FASB terms, like you purchase an asset and you depreciate over the life of the asset, and we call those capital leases. I forget. So there's that aspect. In terms of the city itself, of course, the one budget process I've been through prior to that, my first exposure, deep exposure to city budgeting was with the Community Investment Advisory Board. And that's a great way to kind of come into the city and learn how things work, because you are the board where all the city departments come and pitch what they want to do. So they explain to you the things that they're trying to accomplish and what it's going to cost. So you get a real good sense for what is needed in the city. So I actually made some recommendations just this week for people to serve on that with the eye towards the, bring them into the city's fold here so we can put them on the council somewhere down the road. I think that's about it. I will say this too, though. My formal education was as an economist. I still think that way. There are lots of things in that discipline that work well in the context of looking at a public entity and how it operates. Kind of came into play in how I think about zoning cases. There's a concept called a Pareto optimal move. It's one where everybody's better off, so it's an easy decision. And you have varying degrees where some people are better off, some people are worse off, or everybody's worse off. That's also an easy decision. So that training comes into play. Economics largely is about incentives. There are lots of definitions. One of the great definitions of economics is how you allocate scarce resources to meet unlimited demands. I think I just described the city budget process. So I think that comes into play.
What vision do you have for the future of Rowlett? How would you ensure that vision is implemented long-term?
Well, I have pretty much the same vision that I talked about last year. Rowlett grew up as a bedroom community and is still largely a bedroom community. We've had some commercial changes over the last 10 or 15 years, good, bad, indifferent, whatever they are what they are. But I envision Rowlett to remain primarily as a bedroom community, but one that embraces kind of what I call pockets of urban development. Sapphire Bay is going to be a pocket of urban development. We're going to have a good bit of multifamily down there, some townhomes and some things like that, but it's going to be focused around that urban lifestyle. I see, as I said earlier, potential for that in the North Shore area around the I guess that the farmers would call it a tank, right? I'd call it a lake. If I put my Maryland hat on, I'd say it's a pond. And I see the same kind of thing in the downtown area. It's kind of more of a transit urban area. And I don't just mean downtown in terms of the area south of the railroad tracks. One of the reasons that the CIAB recommended the projects it did a couple years ago was the idea that you've got the dark rail in that area. And while there are some negative things about that, there's some positive things about it. If you look at economic development around the country, around the U.S., and even probably around most Western civilization, that area becomes an urban center and is an entertainment zone, an office zone, a generator. We happen to put our mass transit site in the middle of an industrial park. And so I see over time, again, that transforming as property values change over, and those guys saying, oh, well, I can sell my property here and go build a nice new building somewhere else in another industrial park, maybe up over on the Dexham area where we've got some areas zoned for that, and that becoming more urban. So kind of my vision is that we can keep this kind of bedroom community where people feel safe in their neighborhoods because they know the people are there. It's not a transient area. But then pockets of urban development, which will tend to be more transient. So we keep that, the small town feel that people really like. As I said very early on, what I like about Rowlett, the people are friendly. You can talk to anybody. They're polite. If you ask for help, they're going to help you. So that's kind of what I envision, that we keep that, but we make this opportunity for those who want to have that, don't mow the grass kind of lifestyle.
please share any closing comments with our viewers.
Okay, so closing comments. Let me first share my website, which I hope will be up and running again before you see this video. I'm using the same one I used last year, Brian4Rowlett, .com. That's Brian4Rowlett.com. If you want to reach out to me directly, I've reactivated my Gmail account. Again, Brian4Rowlett at gmail.com. And I'd be happy to answer your questions. I'm also thinking, I thought about this last year and didn't do it. I think I may do it this year, and that is something I want to call porch time. I know our council member Winget does his coffee with Jeff, Java with Jeff. I'm going to do porch time with Brian on the front porch at my house. You have to bring your own beverage, otherwise they're going to count it as a campaign contribution, though. So closing remarks. Well, of course, I hope that you will give me a chance to serve a little longer. I've been in this job about 10 months now. I've made some impact on some things. I'm still working through some of those, the MTMWD membership. For some reason, I'm still working through truck routes. I'm not sure why that is the case. That seems a pretty easy thing to get done, but it seems to be a little more challenging than I thought it would be. There are some other things that, I'm a problem solver, a fixer. I tend to be a blue sky Brian, thinking about things we could do and then try to figure out why we can't do it, as opposed to think about why we can't do something and then figure out what we can do. I'd rather think about what is the big vision? Where can we go? What does it take to get there? Can we do that? So I am happy to serve again if you want me to serve again. But I'm equally happy if you guys want to choose someone else to take the reins. I'd go back to retired life and watch somebody else drink from the fire hose. So thank you again for your time. And I want to say this. Thank you to Jeff Winget. He did not have to do these interviews again, but he has done them again, and they are an extremely valuable part of the election process in Rowlett. So thank you, Jeff.